Welcome to the Lobster Talks podcast by Lobster Capital, where we celebrate the bold thinkers and innovators driving change in the startup world. I'm your host, Gabriel Jarrosson, and today I'm thrilled to have Peter Marton, the CEO and co-founder of OpenMeter, to join us. Peter, thank you so much for being here.
Hey, Gabriel. Thanks you for having me here. I'm really excited to chat.
I'm excited to chat as well. So you have such a cool background. You started previously a startup in observability, and before that you worked at Netflix, and before that you worked at Stripe. It's like the best resume probably ever. And you went through IC, of course, we're going to talk about this as well. So for those who don't know you, please, maybe I've said it all, but I'm sure I haven't. Tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Just really in a nutshell, you mentioned that I co-founded an observability company. That was actually 10 years ago. That was the time when Node.js started to become this thing in the industry. Everyone was using it for microservices, but there was a huge gap on the market to have an observability tool that focuses on tracing and distributed systems. But I find really funny that even today, even in my batch, multiple companies focuses to this. So this is still a not solved problem, but it was very close to my heart. And I was working at Netflix on their serverless infrastructure. Netflix was doing something very interesting that basically UI developers were creating the backend APIs because Netflix was believing that you can provide the best user experience if the UI engineers are very close to how to fetch the data, how to work with the data. You watch Netflix on very different devices, mobile, TV, different sizes, resources. So that was a very fun kind of experience. And most recently I was at Stripe, where I was on the infrastructure side of the things, but I worked a lot between finance and efficiency. Stripe is really good in kind of understanding the cost of infrastructure, understanding on a unit economics level, and kind of using that information to kind of calculate margins, understand cost per transaction, and all those kind of things. So my background is all observability infrastructure.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it sounds everything led you to what you're doing now, and you're going to talk about this now to us, what is OpenMeter, but I want to mention it's very interesting when a founder was working on something 10 years ago, and today people are still working on almost the same problem. Of course, it changed a little bit. I actually had a founder in the observability space, Middleware, who's also a YC company, but he started this in 2023, I guess, probably the same batch as you. And 10 years ago, you're already doing this. I'm thinking, I'm talking to a visionary here, probably. So that's really cool. We're excited to have you here. And so now you're working on OpenMeter. Tell us more about what that is.
Yeah. So with OpenMeter, we help AI and cloud companies to adopt usage-based billing. And what we noticed is that how kind of billing and pricing models becoming more complex, engineering teams, developers really struggling to implement those changes in the infrastructure side, especially when it comes to kind of usage-based billing. Metering on scale is kind of a big challenge. You need real-time data to enforce usage limits, which is important to control cost. And then you need the usage data everywhere in the company horizontally. And it's just becoming like a really, really deep developer problem. And if you can't keep up as a company with pricing changes, you lose your competitive edge. So end of the day, we help developers to kind of quickly implement this paradigm and kind of keep up with the pricing changes.
It is becoming more and more complex, and it's changing. It's actually changing in names as well. So it used to be called just pricing, or used to be called usage-based. And now what you're doing, because it's called OpenMeter, it's called metering. So is it only a name change, or is it actually a different way of thinking about it? Can you tell us more about the difference?
Yeah. So the reason why we started with our main focus is metering, and that's what the company started. Actually, there's a whole story behind that. So maybe let's jump back to kind of how it all started, and then going to give more context. So I mentioned I was working at Stripe and mainly on the cost efficiency side. So Stripe is a transactional business. They charge some fees when you use Stripe for payment, and you also pay a small percentage to them. And that money goes into the merchant bank, it goes into the customer bank, it goes into the Visa network, and obviously Stripe has its own kind of COGS, kind of operational cost, cloud cost, cost of people, and so on. And as Stripe started to go into bigger markets, signing bigger customers, kind of more price sensitive, infrastructure costs become really important to understand in an aspect of a specific customer, specific transaction, specific feature. And I was really fascinated how Stripe was pricing internally, how developers talk between microservices and databases, almost like a public cloud. And that was a main driving factor behind how finance was thinking, how engineering. It was so ahead of the time. but it required a lots of usage data and lots of metering. And I mentioned at the beginning of the call that I'm coming from observability background. So I find it really interesting that we have standards for tracing, we have standards for metrics, for logging in the industry, but we don't have anything for metering. And I was like, there should be one, because every company doing something in-house, something custom. So that was the initial kind of spark to build something like open metering, to build an open source metering solution. But when it really became clear for me is when in 2022 November, ChatGPT started, the AI hype cycle, kind of lots of entrepreneurs started to focus on AI, companies started to adopt. And I realized that they need really good metering information, not just to implement usage-based billing, but to enforce the limits to control cost, even salespeople to understand expansion opportunities, and kind of usage data become this core data in the company. So that's kind of how we started to look into this space. But to be completely honest, OpenMeter wasn't the first kind of approach. First, we wanted to focus on a more end-to-end solution, something very specific. You know, when you start a startup, you want to be very, very specific what kind of ICP you serve, specific problem, and then you can kind of start products around that. So we started looking at the sales problem to kind of find expansion opportunities in the consumption data. But we realized everything starts with having the usage data. Everything starts with metering. And that's when we basically made a pivot and started to focus fully on metering and launch OpenMeter as an open source project, give a blueprint to the industry how you can do metering. And then obviously we are building kind of end-to-end products top of that platform.
That's amazing. Wow. What a journey. I was saying it almost half jokingly before that everything led you to this point, but it's actually true. What you saw in Stripe and then your background mixed together makes OpenMeter. And again, we've had a founder where I noticed this. It's the same for you, where you see something in a big tech, in a Facebook, in a Google, in a Stripe, that's amazing. And then you want to replicate it, kind of spin it off and bring it to the masses with your own product, which is often a very good startup idea, because if it's working so well at Stripe, probably a lot of other people would use it. I want to go a little bit now in the direction of open source, because you've mentioned it, you're open source, you're called OpenMeter. By the way, the name is just amazing, right? It's metering, open source, OpenMeter. Like I give you, straight A. So I want to talk about open source for two reasons. One, I love open source. I think it's amazing. I really want to invest more in open source. I haven't done a lot of it. I've looked at it a lot, but I haven't done a lot of it. But two, I'm not the only one who wants to go deeper in open source. YC themselves also said, we want to go deeper in open source. So, our interests really align there, and that's amazing. So I want to go a little bit into that direction. First, let's cover the basics. The number one thing why people dislike open source, some people, is, it's free, you're not able to monetize, which is obviously not true. So tell us what's free in OpenMeter and how do you monetize?
Actually, I was thinking also changing a little bit on that one in a more open source friendly way, because when we started OpenMeter, then the open source project today focuses purely to the metering aspect. And it doesn't have a UI. It's a very infrastructure product. It's a config-driven product. And that's what today open source OpenMeter is. And then the cloud version, we are running that and we are giving more end-to-end features like integrations with billing providers, help to understand cost and lots of other stuff. But that was only existed in the cloud. And our thinking was originally that we need this clear differentiation between the open source and the cloud. And they're changing a lot now. And we are bringing back actually in the open source cloud capabilities. And in the future, we see more the value in a cloud offering that we solve the really hard infrastructure problems. And what I mean under that, when you need to run a distributed system with stream processing, what OpenMeter is, you need kind of edge cache at the end to kind of have really quick read balances. Those problems are challenging enough that generates enough value that we give it as an infrastructure and we solve it for a customer. Our thinking is also changing on this, but I know that's the biggest fear for lots of companies that is it going to be differentiated enough? And I think at the beginning we differentiated too much. And now we're going to focus more kind of that aspect of the cloud.
That's really cool. That's interesting. Speaking of open source, I want to talk about AI and open source, but do you have open source contributors already or not yet?
We have very little. It's kind of what's happening in this space, what we see. there are many projects which I think similar to ours that if it's a project that so for us, it's more important kind of the transparency, kind of you can contribute to the open source aspect, then probably very few people are going to run OpenMeter as it is today because it's a very heavy in dependencies. That's also something we want to actually fix. That right now, if you want to run OpenMeter, you need Kafka, you need kind of ClickHouse, you need a lot of dependencies. And it kind of makes the project from the open source value more the transparency aspect and the contribution, less of that you likely want to run it on your own today.
And that's a big part of open source is the transparency and the openness, and everyone's able to go look at the model. It's also a great bottoms up go-to-market strategy, which a lot of people like. I see you have very decent amount of stars on GitHub, almost 1,000. Congrats. So that's also a lot of people who are looking at it very closely. Okay, I want to, like I mentioned, want to go to the direction of AI and open source. You're integrating AI in your product. Sam Altman used to be the president of YC. You know, YC and ChatGPT or OpenAI are very close, but ChatGPT is completely closed source, which is sort of what the big lawsuit between Musk and Altman is about, or Musk and OpenAI, I should say. So my question is, do you integrate open source AI or is that part closed source? How did you think about that when you're thinking of, you know, your open source, but then you have closed source AI to integrate? How do you think about those two worlds?
OpenMeter can be used actually to meter lots of different aspects and turn into billing data. So like for us, if the AI model is open source or closed, it's maybe just more like in partnership integration point of view different. So like with open source AI models, like we can build a more deeper integration. We can even open the pull request in these projects or work closely with the community. With a closed source model, it's kind of like we work with what we have. We go to the OpenAI documentation, we see what the SDK needs, and we build around that. We are not big enough that OpenAI like going to change their SDK to better accommodate our need, maybe one day, but that's a huge difference, for example. And I think the open source has a real value there that both community gets way more value just because simply open source and the collaboration is easier between two projects. Interesting
indeed. And speaking of which, I'm guessing because you're doing also usage monitoring and cost monitoring and metering, is it easier to measure in open source? Can you, with the documentations and with everything that you have, you're able to read, kind of make better predictions about the cost? Or is it as hard with open source and with closed source?
I don't see today a big difference. I see more the difference on the integration collaboration side.
Okay. And so basically, I'm thinking here, one of the major problems you must be solving for your customers is just their AI costs too much. We keep seeing those, people who have whatever, an infinite loop in their code and their bill explodes. Is this the number one usage that you're seeing in your customers today?
Yeah, it's definitely AI companies, like what we see, because they're depending so many expensive resources, like as you mentioned, LLMs, GPUs, that's kind of driving the whole, even the pricing decision. So like lots of AI companies choose usage-based billing because they're almost thinking in a cost plus pricing model, which is really interesting to me because traditionally in the last couple of years, cost plus pricing model was considered by product people a bad practice. And suddenly the whole AI industry is like adopting token usage-based, basically cost plus pricing models. And OpenAI is really leading that. I feel like kind of what OpenAI does in pricing, lots of startups following. That's what happened recently, that we see OpenAI move into credit-based prepaid billing, which kind of gives even more control, even on the customer side over the cost, and also kind of covers the upfront cost for the vendor. So it's a great fit for AI, but now we see kind of new startups also thinking in credit-based and prepaid billing, but it's all basically driven by the cost. And yeah, back to our use case, like obviously we have these companies with the metering aspect and the data aspect, but where cost controlling comes in, and it's a big thing that when an AI company chooses a different pricing model, they want to have more recurring subscription, or even they want to implement the credits, you give certain amount of usage to your customer on a monthly basis. And you want to kind of keep the balance up to date, and you want to enforce the limit. Maybe you want to email your customer when they are going to run out of the usage. And depending if it's a soft or hard limit, maybe you even want to cut the consumption. And that problem is challenging from engineering perspective, because on one side, a really large amount of metering data coming into your system, which you need to process immediately, you need to update the balance. And the other end, you need to be able to serve the data with a very low latency around the world, so it doesn't impact the user experience. So that's one big use case for us, cost in this way to kind of helping to enforce it.
No, that's awesome. And again, it's better to be able to cut the usage if the credits run out. Otherwise, you're just giving away your product for free. Nobody wants that. Okay, so let's just maybe redefine metering. We've been talking about it. We wanted to really define what it is for people who are just listening to us. And you have a specific, I believe, definition that you want to share with us. Please go ahead.
Yeah, so I think metering is this really exciting kind of combination of a real-time aspect, almost like a telemetry data, that's also auditable. I always like to use an example like a gas pump. I don't know, maybe it's happened with you as well in your high school and university years that you had a very specific amount of money in your pocket that you could spend on gas. And then you went to the gas pump and you were filling up your car and you try to time perfectly when you stop the pump that it's exactly the amount you have with you. So you maximize, but you don't go over the limit. So that's the real-time aspect of the metering. So metering needs to be real-time because the consumer want to have that feedback. And that's the same for AI. That's the same for electricity, for everything that we are metering. So that's one important aspect of the metering. And the other aspect, because there is money involved, it needs to be very accurate. It needs to be auditable, and the information needs to be retained long-term. And the reason why I'm mentioning these, because if you look kind of that this is a time series data, you could be, this is the same, the observability telemetry metrics. But the telemetry metrics doesn't have the kind of accuracy because of the sampling. It doesn't have idempotency. If you retry, resend, you can lose the data. So it looks similar, but it's actually different because of that requirement. And metering is more event-based. So kind of that's my definition of metering. It's like real-time auditable, and you need to be able to retain a long term.
Yeah, and like you said, it's crucial because if you don't have the real-time exact information, if some information is lost, again, whatever happens is going to break. It needs to be exactly in real time, auditable, and the absolute source of truth. So that's absolutely critical. Okay, thank you very much for that. And you started this, I believe, last year in 2023, maybe at the end of 2022. And then you went through YC, and you recently, not too long ago, announced your 3 million seed round. Congratulations. Can you kind of tell us about the story from the beginning, like from the idea, starting the first few lines of code, getting through YC, the fundraising? What's that story been like?
Yeah, I'm just, thinking through that last 1.5 years, which is so intense. Yeah, so basically what's happened is, I think I was mentioning in my intro that at Stripe, I was working closely with the efficiency team on understanding Stripe cost, and it required lots of metering data. So that was definitely giving the spark for the idea. And I have a good friend, my co-founder, András. We worked together 10 years ago, actually, in that observability startup I co-founded. He was our fourth employee there. And when I was thinking about that, maybe there is something we can build around, I reached out and he was in, and we applied to YC, but we actually applied after the deadline. So we were super late into the whole interview process and everything. It was 2022, December, I believe, when we did the interview and got in. And what that resulted, when we arrived into the 2023 winter batch in January, we had nothing. We knew what we want to do. We had this rough idea, the market we want to capture, but we had no MVP. We didn't have any customer, nothing. We basically just got in. And that somehow made the 3.5 months what YC is kind of a very challenging experience in a sense that you are still iterating on your idea, but you need to build, you need to sign customer, you need to fundraise based on the traction. So that 3.5 months was definitely very challenging. And first we were focusing to more smaller end-to-end problems. And the one that we find very interesting was the problem that revenue and sales organizations have around usage data. And the problem sounds like this, that if you're a usage-based company or your pricing has a usage-based aspect, then you will see your customers has very different consumption patterns. Some people are growing much faster. You maybe even need to give quotes based on very short historical amount of data. Some customers will go over limits, and those are all opportunities for the sales team to kind of upsell them, to do expansion, even to notice churn patterns. You can even measure customer success with usage data. So we find that really interesting space. And we heard from companies that they spend a lot of money internally to build out this connection basically between the usage data and the CRM. And as an engineer, it sounds so simple that like, okay, why the salespeople can go into the data warehouse and make a query and figure out. And what's happening is because salespeople are not used to step out of that workflow, even if they have access to these systems, it's not part of their daily process. They want to have very clear deals, action items in Salesforce, in HubSpot, and they want to go after that. And we heard stories that companies who has this, they spend a lot of kind of resources to build out. And companies who doesn't, the salespeople rather would do cold outbound than to look into these internal hot deals and opportunities. So that's what we went after. But what we realized, if you don't have the usage data, it's so hard to onboard the customers. Everyone has this data in different format. Maybe the data is not good enough in terms of quality, what we need. And kind of we try to do the more focused end-to-end approach, but we realized everything needs the usage data. And every aspect of these end-to-end solutions needs a different quality of the usage data. For billing, you need a very high accuracy. For enforcing usage limits and control cost, it needs to be very real time. For something like a sales analysis or even FinOps, it needs to have a very high retention. So we realized we will only able to do and fulfill our mission if we become the data source and we help companies to have a really good quality of the data. So that was the pivot that eventually happened 6 months into YC and led into launching OpenMeter on GitHub as an open source project.
Awesome. And this led to your seed raise, which is pretty big, especially for 2023. Congrats. How is that process?
It's basically, so we put up the OpenMeter open source last 2023, July, and then we launched the cloud not that much after that. We launched it in November, I believe. Yeah, November, we did the product hunt launch. We got some traction, and that was kind of a good starting point in January to start the fundraising conversations.
Okay, that's good advice for anyone listening. You went through YC from January to April. You didn't have a product. You relaunched in July, you monetized in November, and only in January, when you had revenue and traction, you went out and fundraised. So that means you didn't fundraise after YC, if I'm understanding this correctly.
Yeah, we only raised from angels after the YC batch. So basically, the end of the YC batch was when we were realizing that the sales problem of the usage-based consumption, what we are focusing is we need to pivot away more to the usage collection. And actually the sales problem coming back as a feature to OpenMeter. So it's not that we realized that idea doesn't work. It's more like we realized we need the data. So that time wasn't really a good time for us to fundraise. We raised from angels. We have like over 10 angels, but those are all people who were believing our mission and believing us as funders. Kind of to close the seed round, you needed a little bit more. You needed to show that the idea works and you have some kind of traction around it.
Amazing. Okay. Moving to a completely different direction, but I want to talk to you about moving to the US. You were born in Hungary, if I'm correct, and you are now in San Francisco, and you've been for quite some time. Again, if I'm correct, I'm guessing, but you've been working at Netflix, at Stripe. I don't think it was fully remote from Hungary. I think it was from San Francisco. So I'd like to, and I'm French, so we're just two Europeans talking in English. That's the beauty, I guess, of San Francisco and the Silicon Valley. We would have never met otherwise. But I'd like to ask you, one, what made you want to go to the US?
Yeah, it's always a fun topic. So basically, that Observability company I co-founded 10 years ago, we were very heavily focused on content marketing, talking on conferences, kind of talking to our audience that way. And we kept coming more and more into San Francisco to talk on conferences, to meet people here. And I was always fascinated kind of the whole kind of networking effect here and, how kind of the whole industry is just happening so much quicker here. So I always had this kind of romanticization that like doing a startup in San Francisco and living here. But really the kind of what changed things for me is when my previous company was kind of winding down. By that time, I continuously met folks from the Netflix serverless team because they were coming to the same conferences. They were using the same technologies. It was also all microservices. And when I was looking for a job, both at the same time, they were trying to recruit me. And I was like, probably Netflix is the best place to learn about microservices on a scale. They were doing Node.js. So it was just a perfect match for me. But yeah, that was before pandemic. Netflix only had an office, I believe, in Los Gatos next to San Jose in the Bay Area. So there was no question that if I want to join them, I have to move here. And I think that too, kind of romanticizing San Francisco, Silicon Valley, and this exciting opportunity to join Netflix was making a final decision for me. And this is more the human aspect, which probably you are also kind of familiar that moving countries is not easy. It's like, obviously, you are jumping into a big opportunity from career perspective, and that's very exciting. But, there are lots of friends and family who are kind of staying behind, and you are not going to see us frequently. And you have to rebuild the life, friendships, network, everything. So like moving countries is never easy. And probably you also noticed that. But yeah, I guess that's the story behind moving here. And my immigration story was somehow less scary than other people. Netflix was doing a really great job to kind of give a lot of support to make the move easy. I obviously run into multiple months of waiting for the permission and those kind of things. But at least I didn't have lots of the horror stories that unfortunately other people are facing.
Cool. Are you thinking of going back, or you think your life now for the next, 20 plus years are in Silicon Valley?
Oh, that's a very hard question. And the reason it's hard, while I'm doing OpenMeter and I'm doing the startups, I think I have to be here, and I plan to be here. So I'm planning, I am here for the next 5 to 10 years, or how long this journey is going to take us. After that, it's really interesting because for me, it's always really hard to compare the Bay Area with Europe. I really, really enjoy the European lifestyle. I have lots of friends and family there. Europe is great. I'm for there and I love being there. But all the opportunities, kind of what excites me is here. So what I'm trying to do, I'm actually going quite a lot back and forth the two places. And OpenMeter has an engineering team actually in Hungary as well. So that gives me now actually a really kind of good reason to go back. So I'm spending in generally 2 months every year in Hungary these days. So in that way, I feel I can have the best of both.
Yeah, that makes sense. I go back and forth a lot as well. It's interesting because I was mentioning we've had someone, a middleware, observability startup on the show, and the founder is from India and he has a team in India. And so I asked him about his advice for, working in 2 countries. And so again, I think it's a question a lot of people are asking themselves. He had some answers that he gave us on how to make it work. I believe your co-founder is there with the team in Hungary, if I'm correct.
Yes.
If LinkedIn is up to date, yeah. But what's your, do you have any advice, practical advice, people listening to us on how to manage teams in 2 different countries with such a big time difference?
So I'm not sure I can give a very good advice at the point because we actually recently hired our engineering team after the fundraising. So it's all very new for us. Okay. But one thing I can share, which was very intentional on our side, that Netflix used to be a place that only hired very senior people because then you don't need to go very deep in the management. You don't need many levels. People can take ownership. Engineers can drive the project. And we knew that if we are going to be multi-time zone, multi-location, distributed in every way you can imagine, then we need people who kind of have that aspects, who can take ownership, who can lead the project. So we were very intentional in the hiring that we were aiming for high seniority to be able to work in this setup. It's all very new, so I'm not sure I can say this is work and this is the advice you should follow. It's just how we are thinking about this problem.
No, that's really cool. I mean, that's a great advice for anyone. And I'm sure people would tell you that people who are younger have, I guess, more energy and more ambition or whatever, but especially if you're remote, you hire people who can handle themselves, basically. And that you're not going to have to be behind them every minute. I guess that's a great advice. Actually, without even knowing it, I just followed your advice. I made a full-time hire a couple weeks ago, and it's a profile. It's remote, and it's someone who's not, he's 40-something. I don't want to call him old. He might be very upset, but he's not a 20-something out of university either. His experience is, I guess I should say. So I guess that makes sense. I want to talk about a question that came to my mind. I was listening to you, is a topic that I often think about also for my startup. So I invest only in YC, mostly before demo day or just around demo day, into those amazing startups. I'm really selecting startups with early traction. And it's amazing how fast those deals oversubscribe around demo day. But there's always the question of the next fundraise. Maybe it's a seed extension or hopefully it's a Series A, but there's not going to be a demo day. There's going to be a YC demo day and you won't have thousands of investors looking at you. And so I'm always scared of this kind of the second fundraising. It's going to be much harder also for first-time founders because they go through YC. They're thinking, oh my God, this is so easy. I raised 3-4 million in a week. Like fundraising is awesome. It's super, super easy. And then 2 years later, you want to raise 5 or 10 million Series A. And it's like, this, the wind and nothing like in the movies, like it's the desert and the silence. So I want to ask you the question, because you didn't raise at demo day, but almost a year later or let's say maybe 9 months later, how was that experience for you? Did you find it really more difficult? If yes, how did you do it? And of course you had the traction that helped, but did you feel the same way? Was it hard?
I think it just definitely you had to be more strategical in a way that, as you mentioned, like a demo day, there's a huge hype. You just came out of stealth on LinkedIn, investors reaching out to you proactively, YC gives a platform. So like you don't need to go after investors. And that's obviously a huge help. And if you do that after demo day, especially as we did almost a year after, then you don't have that aspect. There's already the next batch. I think there was only 2 batch after us, basically, or at least one. So like you are not anymore the company coming out of demo day. So you need to manage that somehow. And I think it comes down to basically networking. And around demo day, we actually were talking about VCs. And like we started to build the kind of the network around that. And I was very open. I'm always open to kind of meet VCs, chat, kind of like, which is always a controversial topic because, every conversation with an investor is kind of a pitch. Lots of people are saying that. And some way, yes. But I like to keep the kind of relationship going with investors, even when it's not fundraising season for us. And I think that was a big help because when in January we had the traction, it wasn't about like, hey, we are this startup, like, nice to meeting you. It was like, hey, we already talked. These are the news. This is what we want to do. Are you interested to talk? And we basically had almost no VCs. Actually, that's not true because the 2 VCs we ended up raising, we haven't talked before. But most of the investor conversations were coming from this keeping the relationship. So I guess if I want to translate to any advice, like probably it doesn't work if you are in your bubble, not talking to anyone, and you suddenly want to raise 1 year after the demo day. But who knows, maybe it does.
No, that's fascinating. It's the kind of the very old advice, always be raising, always, even when you're not raising, have those conversations. It's so amazing what you just said. For me, it's critical is you just keep the relationship going and open. And then at some point you're like, okay, here we go. Now we have traction, boom. And you already know the person. They've seen you. And that's amazing. I love that very, very much. And I want to ask you about YC as well. Often I ask the question on the show because I'm investing only in YC. I believe very much in YC. I ask the question, what did YC bring you? I want to ask you a slightly different question is, many people say YC, it's only for fundraising. And for you, it wasn't really the case because you didn't have that thing. Do you still think that YC was worth it even without the fundraising at demo day?
Yeah, it absolutely worth it. The short answer. The long answer is I think YC brings a lot more. And I think what YC brings going to be different for everyone, depending on your background. So obviously YC brings the brand that comes to everyone, except if you are Sam Altman. It probably helps if you're a YC founder. And then it brings you the framework, kind of how to build a startup, kind of how to go through cycles, like so many kind of materials, knowledge base. YC has this internal knowledge base, which sometimes so detailed that sometimes literally has like examples what to write in an email kind of detail, which is fascinating to me. And although I wasn't a first-time founder, I funded my first company in Hungary kind of 10 years ago. And me coming from kind of an Eastern European background, different education, being an engineer, developer, kind of like, I feel I was learning a lot from the YC framework, how to build a startup, even as a second-time founder. Maybe that value is different for some people who has different background. And yeah, you mentioned the fundraising. That's obviously helpful. Oh, and YC is really setting the pace, which is really amazing for me. That when we started the whole YC program, the winter 23, I mentioned that we basically only knew roughly which market we want to go after. And YC is like telling you launch early, launch early. And when you read it, you're like, as a developer, okay, what early? Like some products takes years to build. Like, okay, we will launch, I don't know, summer or whatever. And then they keep saying, but you don't believe it. And you suddenly see all your batchmates launching 1 week, 2 weeks into the batch. And like fourth week into the batch, like more than half of the batch launches. I don't remember the exact numbers, but like a huge amount. And you are like, oh, we need to launch. We need to do something. We need to launch. And that kind of, not just for the launch, everything, they really set the pace. And I think we were quite good, keeping up the pace. Like even YC partners sometimes say that just emulate that you are in YC. The 3 months clock restarts. You just do what you were doing in YC. So that was also a big benefit for us.
That's awesome. I love this topic as well. I hear a lot of discussions around after YC. How do you keep the momentum? Because YC, everyone knows it's crazy. And like you said, you kind of restart the clock and just do it again and again and again. Are you still doing it right now? Are you still in your own YC, have those kind of 3 months sprints? And if yes, how are you keeping it alive for so long?
We kind of still we are thinking about this cycle that like, when we have a new, bigger initiative or even a pivot or anything like that, then as a developer product, it takes a couple of weeks to build it. Let's say 1 month. Some people will be, oh, that's too slow. Some people will be, that's too fast. Let's say 1 month. And then you obviously, in parallel, you want to already sell it, marketing, or even before, even better. But at some point when that goes out, you need to monetize it. And then if you want to fundraise, you need to fundraise top of the traction. So I think this like 2 to 3 month cycles are actually really good. And now I think it's going to change for us in a sense that now the cycle doesn't end with the fundraising cycle necessarily, but we still kind of try to think about these cycles when we launch a bigger product or a bigger feature that like, okay, we need to build, we need to marketing, we need to monetize, and then we need to kind of synthesize the conclusions.
Rinse and repeat. Okay, very cool, very cool. Well, we're near the end of our discussion. I want to ask you a couple more questions before we finish. One, what's the ambitious goal? Let's pick a ambitious goal, just one, not all of them. What's an ambitious goal for OpenMeter that you're excited to achieve in the coming months? Where are you excited to take the company in the near future?
Yeah. On the near future, what we are really focused now is the usage-based entitlement feature. It's basically what we see. We talked about this, that AI companies are very kind of cost sensitive and AI customers as well. And one way to do that, if you give credits to the customer, if you give some kind of entitlement that, I don't know, you can use 10 million tokens in this period of time. And it's a very hard engineering challenge to implement. And we are very close to launch something very, very cool that's going to make it much easier for everyone out there to implement really real-time metering, not just metering, but enforcing the limit with a really low latency. Ooh. It's like a very neat edging problem that actually solves this like big business need. So we are recording this end of May. So in mid-June, you will see a big announcement around that.
Super exciting.
And that's on the short term. The longer term, I guess our mission is still that we want to standardize metering. We want to be the blueprint, and we need to do a lot in the open source kind of ecosystem around that. That's definitely going to be a longer bet. And I guess that's the two most important for us right now.
Yeah, it's not too bad. Great short-term and long-term vision. There's this quote, I don't remember. It's one of the YC partners. The quote is, a founder needs to be able to articulate two completely different thoughts in their heads. One, about the grand vision about the future, like, hey, we're going to solve metering for the whole industry. And at the same time, hold in your head, like, hey, this is the problem, the minuscule thing that I have to focus on today that I need to solve. And if you're able to have those two things in your head at the same time, that's how you're a great founder. And you just demonstrated that by talking about your upcoming launch in just a couple of days, and then the big vision. So that's really cool. You're following that advice. Congrats. Completely different question. Is there a book or a quote that you can recommend to us that had a significant impact on your life that you keep thinking about?
I'm going to recommend a book, which I hope will have a significant impact on my life because I'm just reading now. I recently came across Adam Frankel, and he is very specialized in developer marketing. And his new book literally just came out, and it really resonates to me. And the title, The Developer-Facing Startup.
The developer-facing startup. Cool. Okay.
Yeah.
From Adam Frankel, right?
Yes.
Okay. So Peter, thank you so much. This has been an amazing conversation. Thank you so much for taking the time. For our listeners, where can they find more information online about OpenMeter, and where can they find you online as well?
Yeah, on OpenMeter, you can really follow our progress either on the OpenMeter IO. You will find that's our domain. You will find the blog, and we like to blog about the problems what we are solving. Or our LinkedIn page, we give updates. LinkedIn is the best kind of place to message me. I am on Twitter and other platforms, but I think I'm more responsive on LinkedIn.
Amazing. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me today. It's been a great pleasure, of course. And to our listeners, thank you for joining us as well. Don't forget to subscribe for more conversations like this. And please don't forget to rate us, leave a review on your favorite podcast platform. Until next time on The Lobster Talks, stay bold, stay curious, and remember, those big ideas start somewhere.